Hello everyone, Mr. Boltri here, bringing you video 1.3, where we're going to talk about how we're going to set up labs this semester, and then we're going to get ready to run a lab in our next class, the Circles Lab. So first, let's talk about just kind of how we're going to be doing the general lab setup. And you don't have to write any of this down in your notebook because then we'll write down the specific example of the Circles Lab next. I just wanted to take you through the whole process first so you could have a big picture of where we're going. So on the next available page in your lab notebook, and it's really nice if you have the left and the right available, just so we can see the whole lab on those two pages. We're going to set up a new lab, and every lab, or every page really, needs to have a good descriptive title, and for labs it's pretty obvious, it's just the title of the lab. So then every lab is going to start with a question. And the purpose of the lab is to answer that question. So most of the questions in this class are going to take the form of what is the relationship between A and B? And then we're going to look at those two things and see if we can find a relationship between them. After that, we want to draw a sketch and we want to write a procedure. And this isn't for like a formal lab write-up. We're not submitting it to any review boards or anything. This is just so that we can remember roughly what we did. So a month from now or 4 months from now, when we're going back and looking at the labs to remember what we did, we will have a general sense of what we did in the lab. One of the most important mistakes that I see people make is under the procedure, they say record data. And that's actually missing the point of the procedure because you want to say exactly what you recorded and how you recorded it. So make sure that you are specific when you're writing the procedure, which you'll see that we do in the Circles Lab. Then we're going to collect our data and we're going to do some graphical analysis. So usually we're going to end up graphing our data and then trying to figure out what it means. And that's going to be the entire lab from beginning to end. So instead of talking about a general setup, let's talk about specifics and what the Circles Lab is going to look like. So in our next class, together, we're going to be running the Circles Lab. You and your group members will be collecting your data, and then we'll be moving forward from there. So I want to make sure that everybody's ready to run a lab in our next class. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is to collect as many circles as you can. If everybody has 3 or 4, then we should be good. So here I have a selection of circles, and then we need to talk about what is the central question of our lab. And in this lab, we're going to be looking at what is the relationship between the diameter and circumference of a circle. Keeping it pretty simple, you guys should know this from math class, just to kind of get you warmed up and in the habit of running really good, clean labs. So just some definitional stuff in case you've forgotten over the summer. Diameter is the length of the longest part across the circle, and the circumference is the length of the entire outside. So I think if I asked you how would you measure diameter, you would have a pretty easy answer. You grab a ruler, you put it on the circle, and ta-da, you measure it, there's the diameter. The one thing I will mention is let's go ahead and make sure all of our measurements are in centimeters, just so that when you're comparing with your group mates, we're using the same units. But then I might ask you, how would you measure the circumference? And in response to that question, I feel like I need to make a little clarification between what is the difference between a calculation and what is the difference between a measurement. Because I feel like when I say, how do you measure the circumference, a lot of people's answers are going to be something in the form of a calculation. So a calculation is anything that involves a mathematical function. So if you say multiply by, or square, or divide by, subtract, add, square root, anything like that, then you're doing a calculation. And calculations are fine unless the question is, how do we measure it? So if we measure it, then we have to do a measurement. And a measurement is anything that uses a measurement tool that when we can read a value directly off the measurement tool. So there's lots of measurement tools. This is just a couple, but you'll notice that a calculator is not a measurement tool. If you're reading it off the calculator, then that is a calculation. So in response to how do we measure the circumference of a circle, there's a couple different solutions, but one of them that we've thought of is if you have any string lying around, you can wrap the string around the circle, and then when you straighten the string back out, then that should be the same length as the circumference, and you can measure that right up against the ruler. So back to the Circles Lab task at hand, if we're trying to measure the diameter and measure the circumference, we need to give ourselves a little sketch labeling the diameter circumference. We're going to need a ruler and some string, and it's good to always just include labels in your sketches too, in case a couple months from now we forget that this squiggle actually represented string. So now we're going to write a detailed procedure that says exactly what we're measuring and how we're measuring it. So we're going to measure the diameter by putting the ruler across the longest part of the circle. We're going to measure the circumference by wrapping string around the circle and then using a ruler to measure the length of the outstretched string. And then we're going to repeat the process for at least 5 more circles with your group. But if groups can get more than 6 data points, then that is great. I always say that 8 is great in terms of number of data points. So that is all of the labs set up, and you should be ready to collect your data in our next class for the Circles Lab. So make sure next class you bring your circles, a ruler that measures in centimeters, and string if you have it. And if you don't have a ruler or you don't have string, then some data will be provided, but it'll just be a lot less interesting for you because you'll have to sit there while everyone else is gathering their data. So please do, if you can, try to come prepared. And I will see you in our next class where we will be running the Circles Lab.